The evolution of the royal prerogative. We will start the discussion of this topic with the direct definition of the royal prerogative. Then we will look at what it means. So, A.V. Dicey defines the royal prerogative as the residue of discretionary or arbitrary authority which at any given time is legally left in the hands of the Crown. Sir William Blackstone provides us with a narrower definition, which is as those powers that the king enjoys alone in contradistinction to others and not to those he enjoys in common with any of his subjects. So what do these definitions tell us about the doctrine? We can state that prerogative powers are set of specific legal powers that are accepted by the courts as part of the common law. They may be exercised only by the monarch and UK's government ministers acting in the name of the Crown. The powers deal directly with the monarch and the ministers dealing with these powers. Therefore, it is important to look at these powers in a historical perspective. Historically, the medieval monarchy consisted of both feudal lord and head of the kingdom. The king had these powers to preserve the realm against external foes and for the public good. He could exercise the royal prerogative and impose his will in respect of decision-making in those areas. As you can see that these fields are very broad, and so was the power. However, there was practical limitation to the royal prerogative. Certain royal functions could be exercised only in certain ways. So there was restrictions even on the monarch to limit his powers and to avoid arbitrary decisions. The common law courts were the king's courts, and only they could decide questions of title to land and decided punishments for felonies. Why do you think these two policy areas were held to be so important that they were to be determined by the courts and could not be exercised directly by the monarch? What kind of rights did they represent? Even for an absolute monarchy to run successfully, citizens have to be granted some rights. The two rights that were relevant here are property rights and the right to have a fair trial. These rights may be taken for granted here, but if we contrast the situation with some other parts of the world, for example, foreign nationals cannot buy land in the United Arab Emirates. However, there are some designated areas in Abu Dhabi where aliens can lease the land. Therefore, the ownership of land rights is very limited. Coming back to the United Kingdom, in the 17th century, disputes arose over the undefined residue of prerogative power claimed by the kings. The conflict gave way to the Bill of Rights 1689, which declared certain specific uses and abuses of the prerogative as illegal. The second stage in the evolution of the prerogative was the growth of responsible government and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy, encouraged by various electoral reform acts of the 19th century. It became established that the bulk of prerogative powers could be exercised only on the advice of the ministers who were responsible to the parliament. However, the ability of the ministers to rely on the prerogative powers continues to give rise to the problems of accountability. Although the monarch retained formal power of appointment and removal of ministers and ministries, the development of collective ministerial responsibility made it increasingly difficult for the king or queen to exercise such power freely against the wishes of the prime minister and the cabinet. Let's now look at the role of the courts in interpreting royal prerogative powers. In the De Keizer's Royal Hotel case of 1920, the owner of a hotel situated in London claimed compensation under the Defence Act 1842 for occupation by the armed forces when the country was at war. The government relied on the prerogative power under which less compensation would be payable to the hotel owner. It was argued for the Crown that the competent military authority was empowered by the 1914 Act and regulations to take possession of land and buildings, while the subject had no legal right to compensation. The House of Lords unanimously affirmed the Court of Appeal's decision, rejecting the government's claim to rely on prerogative power and holding that once the statute had been enacted, the prerogative powers fell into suspension for the duration of the life of its provision, should the statute be replaced or amended or modified. The principles established in De Keizer's Royal Hotel case have been referred to in later judgments when the government's claim to rely on the exercise of power under the royal prerogative was challenged, such as R versus Secretary of State for the Home Department Ex parte Fire Brigades Union. This concerned changing terms of the employment. In De Keizer's Royal Hotel case, the House of Lords took Blackstone's notion of the prerogative. However, in the Burma Oil case of 1965, Lord Reed expressed some difficulty with the idea of a limited royal prerogative. In the Burma Oil case, the main issue was the destruction of the oil fields in Burma by the British forces during the Second World War. The oil fields were destroyed to prevent the plantation from falling into the hands of the advancing Japanese army. It affected the Burma Oil Company Limited that brought an action against the UK's government. The House of Lords held by a majority that although the damage was lawful, it was the equivalent of requisitioning the property. Any act of requisition was done for the good of the public at the expense of the individual proprietor, and for that reason the proprietor should be compensated from public funds. The Parliament in the War Damage Act 1965, which was a retrospective act, overturned the decision. The act retroactively exempts the Crown from liability in respect of damage to or destruction of property caused by acts lawfully done by the Crown during a war. Lord Reed points out that there are not many cases on royal prerogative, and in recent times any war that has been waged has been declared by the emergency session of the Parliament. Lord Reed states, "There is difficulty in relating the prerogative to modern conditions. In fact, no war which has put this country in real peril has been waged in modern times without statutory powers of an emergency character. The taking of property for the defense purposes was authorized by a statute not only in the last war and in the 1914 war, but also in the Napoleon Wars, and it could only be taken subject to payment of compensation." The scope of the royal prerogative power is notoriously difficult to determine. It is clear that the exercise and extent of the power is a matter of common law, making the courts the final arbiter of whether or not a particular type of prerogative power exists. The difficulty with this approach is that there are many prerogative powers for which there is no recent judicial authority and sometimes no judicial authority at all. In such circumstances, the royal prerogative powers are not clear. This uncertainty has been criticized by Professor Brazier. The demand for a statement of what may be done by virtue of the royal prerogative is of practical importance. Yet it has been said judicially that such a statement cannot be arrived at. The powers seem to make sense in practice, but they are difficult to discuss in theory. The problem with this is that any power that cannot be limited theoretically may result in abuse of power. However, the courts act as limit enforcers of these powers. Professor Wade takes the definition of royal prerogative one step further and argues that the prerogative should be exercised in legal realm. The reason being that the exercise of such power has the ability to alter the rights of the people. He also introduced the term spurious prerogative. That basically means that the action taken under the prerogative has nothing to do with the power of the official, but instead is a practical outcome of the situation. He makes this point from the decision of the Council for Civil Service Unions versus Minister for Civil Service 1985 case. In the GCHQ case, the British government under Margaret Thatcher decided that employees of the Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, would not be allowed to join any trade union for national security reasons, thus undermining the rights of the individuals to join a union. This was enforced through an order in council, an exercise of the royal prerogative. The unions chose to bring this matter to court through judicial review, first to the High Court of Justice, which ruled the order in council was invalid. The case then went to the Court of Appeal, which decided that the national security issues trumped any problem of propriety and ruled in favor of the government. From there, the case went to the House of Lords. The House found that the exercises of the royal prerogative were generally subject to judicial review, with certain exceptions, such as matters of national security. This was a significant break from the previous law, which held that prerogative powers were not in any way subject to judicial review. The GCHQ case served to identify that the application of judicial review would be dependent on the nature of the government's powers, not their source. The final argument raised by Professor Wade is that if a government's act does not have the power to change the rights in the domestic laws of the UK, then it should not be considered under the royal prerogative. He cites the examples of international treaties that bound the UK as a state and not necessarily its citizens. Payne has criticized this approach, saying that every government act affects the rights of the citizens. What are your views on it? Do you think that some acts of the government do not affect the rights and can be placed outside the royal prerogative category? Or do you think that every government act has a ripple effect and can affect rights?